quite something.
Thank you. It's a beautiful church, actually,
It is that. It absolutely is that.
in Astoria, San Joseph Church in Astoria.
Got it. Astoria. I wasn't sure of the location until I had
We are just
navigated
up
away
high,
from it.
like maybe 50 feet up high in a choir loft. So yeah,
Got
it's
it. Lily, welcome back. Jamie, welcome. Zaria Edmonds, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. We're almost at critical mass to kick it off. And we'll give that one more minute before we do so. There is that.
All right, it's streaming for real.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we click over to 10:55. Welcome back, everyone, for our pre-election day Frank Morelli Masterclass. I was wondering who would cringe at that, and I wasn't sure. So thank you all for smiling. You join us, whether you are joining us on Zoom or through the YouTube channel on the Aaron Copland School of Music website. Welcome. Good morning. We are making progress today via deconstruction. Deconstructing into smaller steps to build larger ones. It's how you build a building. It's how you build your practice. It's how you build a life. But for today, it's how you take apart an approach to learning music and to making those little steps into a serviceable whole. And it's how you build all of the technique on your instrument. It's how you build your understanding of different musical forms and different styles and different traditions. It's how you build your own teaching. And ultimately, via deconstruction, it's how you build your success as a musician. All of us make progress at very personal and different speeds, but it's all made up by deconstructing the task in front of you into the steps that you can accomplish. So would you join me, please, in welcoming back Professor Frank Morelli to lead us this morning. Welcome back.
Thank you, Maestro. And once again, you summed up my entire lecture in your opening. So see you all next week. Bye.
God bless. Drive safe. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you. Bye.
So glad we had this time together. Okay. So, yeah, that's about it, what he said. So we could discuss the World Series if you want or something else. No, that is exactly right. You know, it comes down to, first of all, I'm happy to be back again. Good morning to everyone, the valiant people that continue to show up. And as I've said before, I'm going to review it only because some people may be tuning in for the first time. This is now the seventh lecture or presentation in this series. We started with three of them having to do with the basics of playing, support, breathing, tone production, articulation, all the concepts that are really in common amongst all wind players, and you could argue singers, although I don't claim to have specific knowledge of any instrument outside of my own. And I even question that sometimes, but that's the one I know the best. And then we followed that up with the idea of of learning from the human voice, learning by listening to great singing, realizing that the instrument is our voice, and treating it as such and not as a machine. And then we're on now to, as Professor Powell introduced, we're on to the idea of deconstruction, which really is a way of, and he already implied this, although I don't think he used this exact words, but it's really the philosophy of problem solving. Any problem, personal, professional, mechanical, all have to do with problem solving. And they all have to do with breaking things down into its elements, establishing, and the best way to learn, and you should know this also as teachers, is to try to always start, whether you're teaching yourself or someone else of any age, try to start with your feet on firm ground. Say, well, this I feel I do know. Or as much as I know anything, this is the best thing I know. I can start from here. And then using that position to find your way into the unsure territory. And that works in your life. It works for tonguing. It works for reeds. It works for musicianship. It works for everything. And so this theory is, just when one reads any kind of a self-help type book or article, and I haven't read too many of those except as they might relate to performance anxiety, peak performance, and all that. And so much of it boils down to basic problem solving. You might say the old term horse sense, just plain old horse sense. And so I apply that to my own learning, for myself. I apply that to my teaching and of individuals, and I apply it here. So the thing I requested of the class and didn't have too much result was for people to contribute recordings. Maybe are there any people that are, I know Sequoia is prepared and has sent something in, my student Sequoia Kessler, freshman bassoonist, talented young lady. Is there anyone here who's interested in playing, even if they did not send something in, who's playing in a relatively good space and on relatively good equipment for a live playing? Anybody? Well, speak up if there's somebody there, or chat, or add to a chat so that we can hear from you. And if it's my bassoons or people from my rep class in the afternoon, you're welcome to play. The thought was to let other people have opportunities similar to the rep class, but I'm more than happy to work with my rep class family anytime, as many times a day as possible. So okay, so I'm going to share the screen and just review a little bit with my super duper PowerPoint. One moment, let me just get back to the beginning. Choose the right one so I won't waste your time once I start trying to do this. Those of you who have been around realize I'm at times able to handle this. Other times not so well. Okay, let's see how I make out. So I'm sharing the screen with you and a slideshow from the current slide. That was like a pro, you got to admit it. I even amazed myself. So, right, we've already said this, but making progress by deconstructing excerpts. The point, too, to remember this, and again, this is repetition, but you have to realize this. Everything we do is, in some ways, could be described a habit, whether it's which shoe you put on first, what you do in the morning, about how you brush your teeth, what you grab first, where you keep your toothpaste. Everything we do, even the simplest things, are habitual. And we all know, or most of us would be familiar with the slogan, the saying, old habits die hard. Old habits die hard. So you have to first come to a realization, this is a habit that should die, hopefully not too hard. We should try to change this. And then you have to have the wherewithal, the techniques, but you have to have an understanding of the right way to do it, and then techniques that will allow you to improve. And that's your job as a self-teacher, as an independent thinker, and that is the job of the teacher. That is my job. It's not enough to say that sounds out of tune, or that articulation is too hard, or that vibrato is too wide. I would imagine that either you don't realize it or you don't know how to fix it. And it's my job to help you realize it, and it's my job to help you fix it, not just to criticize. One thing is criticism, the other thing is feedback towards learning, improving. So I try to stay with the latter and not the former. So on top of that, and the next two classes, and we'll see if anyone wants to play, and those classes are on audition repertoire, playing the right way to play, the most successful ways that I have found to play for auditions, orchestra auditions. And but people can show up with whatever they want. If you have some solo repertoire you would like to play, please bring it in. I won't limit it to just orchestra. But the idea was the concept of playing behind the screen, how to make a good sound, a good presentation, especially when people are not watching you, when they're just listening. Because what happens in that situation is everything is under a microscope, because the brain is no longer accessing and assessing visual information related to the performance. They may be looking at a score, which adds a whole nother level of how the brain is working in assessing the player, but they're not watching you perform. That puts your sound and everything you do under the microscope. And you must play in a way that is extremely disciplined and clear and musical in order to be successful. Anything less than that is unlikely to be successful. So everything we've been working on, even in terms of this problem solving, I'd like to think it was my goal that this curriculum that we have followed was in fact working out on a macro scale of problem solving, breaking things down into their parts, putting them back together to go for the final result. And then within that, the micro breaking down of everything having to do with breathing, parts of breathing in and then breathing out, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my concept of building this, to the extent that my intellect allows, which is limited, is that this has been organized in my mind. And I'm spending the time to explain this to you so that you understand the significance of how I've put it together, and hopefully you will get more out of it that way. So one of the things I have learned over the years in my own playing and in my work as a coach, as a teacher of bassoon players, and as a coach of many, certainly wind and brass players and even string players, is that when you play repertoire over and over again, just like we talked about old habits dying hard, once you've played the exposition of the Mozart Bassoon Concerto the 1,000th time, which is not an exaggeration, what are you going to do on the 1,001st time to improve it? And I would suggest that playing through it again is rather useless at that point. And that's where the breaking it down, deconstructing it, and there are different ways of going about that. Some are absolutely elemental, like I've said, to review from previous episode, when we last found the Masked Crusader, is there are 7 notes in Shaharazad. Practice those 7 notes until they are in tune with a good sound, with an even sound from note to note. Then think about, then there are other things you might do. So there are elemental aspects. Get your fingers through different methods, which we've discussed, and we can discuss more today, so that your fingering accuracy and discipline is as ironclad as you can make it. Work on your tonguing, right? So we work on the things that are related to this particular excerpt, or the Mozart Concerto. We'll use that example as I brought it up, without playing the Mozart Concerto. And then one of the problem-solving methods I came up with was, and I'm not saying I invented it, but I came up with to integrate into my teaching, was what we did in the 4th and 5th classes. Copy great singing. And for bassoon, I found no one better than Fritz Wunderlich to mirror and then to use his example and apply it to the Mozart bassoon concerto. So once one is in voice, once one is confident about the fingering and articulation, it is then to take all of that, leave that in the co-pilot seat, and have as your image the sound of Fritz Wunderlich singing our bassoon concerto. And I am convinced, and I've seen it happen with students, that it will do the trick. Because you have played these pieces way too many times. So have I. And this is the way to keep yourself aware and able to improve. Break them down. Obviously, this slide is rather self-explanatory, especially after what I just discussed, right? All of those things, the relevant factors, the elements of a piece of music. Tone quality. Now, as far as sound goes, because we're going to get into that some more today, and it relates to the first 5, going back to the first 5 lectures. As I said about tone quality in the past, great sounds, to find the right sound, think of great sounds that you admire, but not necessarily on your own instrument. In fact, better not on your instrument. So you get your own ego, and I don't mean ego in the sense of being self-important, but just awareness. Get outside your own self and hear great sounds. And if you hear a few different great sounds, a great singer, a great violinist, a great flute player, if you're a bassoon player, you will find that each of those instrumentalists or singers have many things in common about their beautiful sounds. And that includes good intonation, proper use of vibrato, focus in the sound from pitch to pitch. And let me give you a piece of advice. The way you make sounds on your instrument sound similar is by how you focus on the inside, the core of the note, not the outside. If you're just thinking about the outside of the note and bringing notes together as a slur, just as a legato, non-tongued passage, you will indeed be connecting those notes by a literal sense. But I have heard many people play an absolutely legato slurred passage with no sense of connection between the notes. That's the kind of playing that really not only leaves me cold, but leaves me, especially when it's being done by people that should know better, a little bit less happy than I might be. So Shaharazad, as we said, this has 7 notes to it. And so we worked on Shaharazad already in the previous class. Charting out, which I'm going to get into today, and I don't recall if I showed this. This is the cadenza in the Shaharazad for bassoon. The last section of it is in 3 parts. Part 1. Part 2 is like part 1. And that's the other thing you've heard me talk about, the rule of 3. Every composer under the sun does things often, something twice in a row, the second being either an exact replica of the first or very closely related due to a harmony change or a slight change, but very much like the first time. And part 3, the third part, has to balance the other 2. It's often twice as long as the other 2, and that third part goes in the other direction often. We will see that in Tchaikovsky 4, which we will see today. So, once again, if I find my cursor, we have wherever it is. The third one goes longer, right? The third one starts here, halfway through. La-di-da, halfway through. There it is. And the third one is divided into 3, which are 2 of the same, be-da-da-dee-da-da-dee-da-da-da, and then the third one is an elongated version of the little mini A and B, or A and A prime. And the third one is itself divided into 3. If you understand that, if you get that locked into your head as a template, it is much less likely that you'll screw up the fingering when you play it. If you look at it as a succession of black dots and you are going to attempt to hit the right finger at the right time, you are unduly wagering a $700 jet ticket on that lack of preparation.
May I jump in one quick
Please.
bit here? This is really hugely important. I've just spent an entire week concentrating on this with the advanced conducting folks. It's getting past I've seen that note a million times. I'm going to play it. It means a fingering. The black dot on the page doesn't mean a fingering. First of all, if you're a bassoonist or a clarinet player, the black dot on the page could mean 2 or 3 fingerings. But that representation for an instrumentalist, for a singer, is the sound. Just as a texture change in a score for a conductor is a change in physicality. So I just really memorize what Professor Morelli has just said, or internalize it in a way that's meaningful for you, because that is an enormous, like big red letters across the top of the page concept to take in and to work from. The black dot on the page isn't the thing. The black dot on the page is ultimately you making a decision. So thanks for letting me jump in, but that jived perfectly with a thing from conducting class this week.
No problem. I have a PayPal account. You could you could. Now I'm teaching conducting. Look at me. Oh, I don't think you'd want me to teach. I always thought, I must say, actually, and this would be very scary. Maybe they do that at schools sometimes, is to have some of the professionals on the faculty in orchestra playing, sit in the conducting training orchestra and let the students know all the stuff they're doing wrong. And if they're doing something right, which could happen.
You mean ways to improve, of course.
Ways to improve. See, I lose my philosophy of problem solving when it comes to management and conductors, I must say. But no offense to present company. Often when I've met up with we have a new faculty member somewhere else I teach who conducted at the City Opera, and I said to him, and I kind of remember, I said, I hope I was nice, because you never know. If I kind of apologized, even if I just figured I'd throw an apology out there as a sort of an in case apology. But anyway, that's another story. We won't get into life in the pit at this moment. So, fingering and tonguing accuracy, how to work on that. We discussed that. And the idea of taking a pattern and changing it, for instance, in the Shaharazad, ba-da-da-dee-da-da-da-da-da, moving over the downbeats, and then putting the new note on the downbeat, be-da-da-dee-da-da-dee-da, and really feeling that new downbeat. And that has great effect, in helping your brain and fingers to really coordinate. Of course, you could also do the da-da-dee-da-da, the unevens back and forth. I just don't happen to have it on this page. All right, and then, keep losing the cursor thing. Hello. Then singing the passage without playing it, like the Shaharazad, any of these solos. Hear it. It's a tune. Ultimately, Figaro, our famous bassoons, you look at that and you go, oh, here comes nothing, here goes nothing. But actually, it's a fast tune. It's a fast tune. So it's like Yankee Doodle or something else. It's a tune. And remember, you're a musician. If you're only looking at something like you were trying to figure out you were in a calculus class trying to figure out the equation, even then there's a certain amount of creativity one might bring to that. You're leaving half of your ability, at least, the artistic side of your brain, off. If you're not hearing the tune, if you're just seeing, again, that succession of black dots. All you're then trying to do is, by rote and by seeing in front of you, the notes, and seeing that next note there, or by memory, to move your fingers in the proper succession. What if you actually think of it as a tune? So one can practice. I suggest doing this for something like Ravel G major. We have a fast thing in the Ravel G major piano concerto to sit. And I know this because I am absolutely guilty of this, of just playing it. I have fast fingers. I played the sax before I played the bassoon. I love to get around it, chow the head up here, but I'm kind of moving along. I'm having a great time. But I should be thinking, ba-da-dee-da-da-da-dee-da-da-dee-da-dee-da, hearing the pitch that goes with those fingerings. And I'd be honest and say that is not always at the top of my list. It should be. Rite of Spring, we talked about this last week, and I played for you my own recording I had done of playing it to a click. This is another way of organizing it, the template idea, which is what we're on to today. More than, because the other things we covered last week. And here we go. Here's Tchaikovsky 4. Now, I played this solo incessantly, like everybody else, for decades. Well, not everybody else for decades. Some of you are not old enough to have played it for decades. But old farts like me have played it for decades. And it became clear to me, using this idea of the rule of threes and other aspects of why I would play this thing over and over again, and sometimes I would like it and sometimes I would not. And let me see if I do that. I guess I'll just turn. Sorry to everybody. I'd rather look at you. It's much more fun, but I'm going to leave it off for a second. So we have actually, where do I get there? I have to go. Where do I go? Or actually, I don't know how to do this without going back out of this. Could someone else play Sequoia's? I think she sent it to Mr. DePonio and maybe Mr. Powell, the recording of her playing the Tchaik 4 solo.
I should be able to. Let me.
If you can. Otherwise, I'll go out of this and get it. It's just that, I'm such a kind of not.
Let me get it up.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it very much. So you could run it when you got it. I'm not hearing anything, but maybe you're still working on it.
Almost there.
Okay, cool. No, as long as
It's gonna knock your screen sharing off if I try and share this. But
all right. I should have embedded her recording into this slide, right?
let me just play it. It might come through.
Okay. I think it is gonna. Okay, let's stop there, Joe, for the moment. That's good. Thanks. Okay, so that gives you a nice job, Sequoia. We'll redo it again later. Because were you doing that through share computer sound, or over your?
It may have just been picking it up from my microphone.
Yeah, that's what I think. But that's all right. Just to get the tune. Then we'll go and do it some more. We'll do it some more. So, after many decades of playing this, it occurred to me, here's a very important thing. We showed this actually last time. I was saying to you about, and the king of this was Stravinsky in terms of notation, and how if you play exactly what he wrote, you get the perfect rubato, which sounds antithetical, but it is not. If you go back to Shaharazad for a moment, you'll notice, for instance, these accents in that Rimsky wrote. And the point of that is that he wants you, at the beginning, it's very natural the way you would phrase that, and he doesn't need to mark all sorts of stuff in there to get you to do it. In the second phrase, he wants you to actually go against your own instincts, accenting what would otherwise be the weak beat, as it had been before. This F, this E flat and D would have been the weak beats, and now they're the strong beats. So one has to factor that into their understanding of the piece. And in terms of an audition, you have to carry that out. Otherwise, the listeners will think you really aren't a very not a thoughtful musician. So now the question is, why did Stokowski put these accents in? Why were they necessary? Now, it's the repetition of 3 notes in a row, where usually we get a little stronger, but here's 3 notes in a row here too, but he didn't put an accent. Okay, so it occurred to me that most often composers do not write one bar at a time. They write groups of bars. And so you see here, half note equals 28, which is 56. That if you think of this particular solo, and this goes for oboe too, but you can apply this to any solo, you just have to use your head and analyze it. There's a leading tone on the downbeat. Dee-da-da-da-da. So there's absolutely no reason for a composer to put a line or an accent there. That would be stating the obvious. And in fact, if he did write that there, I think he's saying, oh, do that more than usual. If he put an accent there, I'd go, which is not what he intended, and he did not write it. Okay, so it occurred to me after years of playing this piece, and actually here, let me get my metronome on 28. And Sequoia and I discussed this yesterday, and she was working, her actually metronome went down to 30, which is close enough. And so we did it with 30, which was great, and we'll talk to her in a minute about that. And I also, all right, let me just say one other thing. In orchestra playing, and in any good playing, it's possible to play expressively and with a sense of rubato without destroying the underlying pulse. And great performers do that, even the ones we think of. Well, there are a few that I find a little overly eccentric. I won't be dropping any names. But most of the great players that I've gotten to play with actually play with a great sense of time, even when they're being expressive and known to be expressive players. So the problem is, if you put this, all right, if you put this excerpt on 60, I imagine you can hear my metronome, right? I'm pretty sure you can hear it. I'll turn it up. That's pretty much up. That'll keep you accurate, but it ties you a little bit more down to the beat. And when you first practice it, you might practice it that way. And again, you can apply this to any excerpt. I'm using a bassoon excerpt as an example, obviously, because I'm a bassoon player. Now, if you want to create an underlying sense of discipline in your time, but have a little room for expression, you can put the metronome on a larger subdivision instead of a smaller subdivision. And I think, I'm trying to remember if we discussed, you can do this even with something like Bolero and put it on 24. And that really makes you count. There we go. is where you get into trouble with the metronome, because there's usually a slight retard and a breath. So if you want to practice something where you need to do a slight retard and a breath, just do that and then pick up the metronome again. The timing may not be exactly the same as it would be in a performance, but you can go back almost like you were putting two pieces together in GarageBand and tighten it up, right? So it'll work one way or the other. I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm a little rushed. Wait for... So you see, I waited till the next beat and then I continued. That will not be exactly how one would do it in a real performance, but it'll give you a chance to practice the entire excerpt, and except for that one spot, to feel this bigger beat. Now, that became important because I realized Tchaikovsky, the reason for the accents was during the first time through, he puts the leading tone on the downbeat. I hear this as two bars going together, which is where we come up with this 28. Leading tone on the downbeat, no kidding. We're going to go to a leading tone on the downbeat. That's the way we play music. We're not going to go. That's backwards. Bad grammar. So he has an A and an A prime, going back to the rule of threes. So here's A. Now often people will go, no. There, it's not a leading tone on the downbeat. If anything, the leading tone's on the upbeat, on the last eighth. And it's the rule of threes. So we're into the B section, the third of the three. It's going to be twice as long as the other two, or the two will be essentially the length of the other two combined. Right? Now he has an upper neighbor on the next downbeat, which you could argue is something one would lean on, like an appoggiatura, right? You could. But then he has espressivo and an accent. He does obviously you can tell the crescendi, decrescendi are mine. I think it's pretty obvious. They're sloppy enough and slightly a different color. Here now where I showed strong, and it's very convenient that this excerpt is laid out where the two phrases line up with one another. Strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, strong. You see? So what he's doing on the second phrase is telling you go to the wrong beat. Because when you do something in two, it's 1, 2. It's not 1, 2, right? It just sounds odd even my saying that to you. So the second phrase goes exactly the opposite. That's why I turned those A's upside down. And you don't go, because that would be just doing the same thing 3 times in a row. Boring. Bach knew that. So this may look like an awful lot of factoring in, a lot of work, a lot of blah-de-blah to you. But let me tell you something. Since I created this strong template in my mind, I feel that I essentially don't have a problem playing Tchaikovsky 4. Is every time going to be as good as the other time? If I'm in tune with a good sound, I expect an A performance all the time and an A plus hopefully when I need it. And that's it. So I'm going to unshare, and then we could listen and stuff while we're doing the class. This is the level of understanding you want to bring to an audition and to playing. I mean, playing music, let alone an audition. But we're talking also, this is about learning excerpts and all of that. If you bring this level of understanding and preparation, then it's much less. First of all, it's very likely you will have a higher self-confidence for good reason, because you put in the work and you're prepared. And you are less likely to get thrown off by what's going on with the fact that you're sitting behind a screen and the members of the Philadelphia Orchestra sitting on the other side of the screen, which can be somewhat distracting. Now, we had an audition at the City Opera which had no screen for first oboe, and Robert Botti, who won the audition but then soon after ended up in the Philharmonic on second oboe. Wonderful guy I've known forever, Robert Botti, wonderful man and player. He was playing, I think it was Tombeau de Couperin, even though it's an opera audition, but we often put regular, standard excerpts, because if you could play Tombeau de Couperin, most likely you could play operas too. It's not a far stretch. Now, we had our audition for his chair in a ballet room at the State Theater. And it's a boomy room, a big room, one of the rooms they dance in. They practice dancing in. Had doors down either end, like of a hallway. Big room, like big rehearsal room. When I auditioned for the City Opera, it was in the orchestra rehearsal room, which is Death Valley, just the opposite sound. But I was prepared for that, so it didn't freak me out. That's a whole nother issue we might get into when we talk about playing behind the screen. Well, Rob was playing, we call him Rob. Rob, well, I call him Bots, but that's another story. That goes for many years back. But Rob was playing Tombeau de Couperin. I'm pretty sure it was Tombeau. And we had complained that the room was a little cold. Those of us on the committee, and that was with Chris Keene. And so we're sitting there listening to Rob play great. And a superintendent from the building, one of the building guys, walks in the door while he's playing and starts waving this thing around that gets the air temperature. Like, it's like a thermometer. It looks like a ratchet. It should be going, but it isn't. But it's going wacka, 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 wacka. And Rob kept playing. And the guy, he's checking the air temperature in the room. So then he walks back out, and Rob finished that particular phrase. And we said, oh, yeah, he sounded great. Nothing, he was unperturbed, said, Rob, that's a drag, man. You can play that again, or if you want to take a moment. He went, because it was Rob, no, it's okay. So he starts on the next excerpt. The guy went to the other door, because he had to check the temperature at the other end of the room. He starts playing, and the same guy walks in the room. Because we looked at the guy and said, we're having an audition. He goes, oh, okay, So he starts to play again, and wacka, 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 wacka from the other end of the room. But it's a funny story because Rob won the job anyway, and he played great anyway. But no, it's his focus was such. I'm not saying you have to be prepared for this to happen to you on an audition, but there's an example of distraction, right? And Rob, who was well into his game, didn't matter that guys were waving stuff around him while he was playing his oboe. He played just as great as he always does. And just, I give you that example. So the more preparation that you have for each excerpt, you must have a playbook. And you must have, I'm suggesting this playbook includes this deconstruction. Like on a day of an audition, it's much better to practice the notes in Tchaikovsky 4, the notes in Shaharazad to vocalize, to get your voice going, your ear going, because you don't need to, as long as you try to remember all the flats, or whatever notes in the Shaharazad, but other than that, you don't need to keep going through it to make sure you remember how to play this piece that's not difficult in terms of fingering, that you've played a couple of thousand times, it's safe to say. So, but to be in voice, to have a strong idea in your mind of the organization of this piece, that's going to win the day for you. That's the crucial thing. So now, Sequoia, back to Sequoia. And first of all, any questions about this stuff? And then I want to talk to Sequoia, and we'll get
just a quick drop in, and that is if you spin this technique forward, it's exactly how you get an entire concerto under your belt. It really is the same kind of thought process. You don't. One of the things that musicians do really, really well is we end up thinking extra linearly. You can drop us in the middle of a process, a conversation, a situation, and we can function really well because we know where in that timeline we are. You don't practice the middle movement of the Mozart Bassoon Concerto by playing all the first movement, then working on the middle movement, and then finishing it at the end. You enter and exit stuff that you know really, really well because you've practiced this way.
That's exactly the story. And the other thing about that is this. You never play Shaharazad unless you're in tune. You've done this work first. Never, ever. And I don't care when you're in your bunny slippers in your bedroom practicing. No, you never play it that way. You want to have it where it is absolutely routine that the first time you play Shaharazad, the first time you play the Czech 5 horn solo, the first time you play Daphnis, you are ready to play it by warming up. And I would argue you could come up with a playbook of these are the things I'm going to warm up on backstage prior to my audition instead of running my list, because I know through the most recent 1,000 times that I've worked on this repertoire that if I do this preparatory work and am aware and sure about my goals and the performance of it, that it comes out the first time. And not, I do this. I'll practice without being present enough in my practicing. Sure, some of you have heard that idea. I'm sort of daydreaming and kind of half practicing. And I do well. I'm playing really well. But I'm training myself to be half into it and playing well. Now I get to the audition or the important performance and I'm thinking, oh no, I got to really concentrate now. I'm really going to do a great job. Let's say not even being nervous about it after all these years. I've made enough mistakes. I don't get that nervous anymore. I have a slag heap of errors that I've made. So one more error doesn't really kill my ego that much. I'm battle hardened, battle tested at having bloopers. I try to avoid making them on television. And I'm pretty good at that usually. And for recording sessions, you can always go back. But live recorded stuff, I usually aim to not to screw up. Rather not have to listen to that for the rest of my life and beyond. But the point is that, so now all of a sudden now I'm like changing my thinking. Sure, you could say, well, now you're concentrating even more. Well, that on the face of it is not a bad thing. More than on the face of it is not a bad thing. But it's a difference in how you prepared. It's different than how you prepared. And I am totally guilty of that one. I mean, absolutely. I would put myself as, no, I hope that's not immodest, chairman of the board of practicing that way, the wrong way. Be present in your practicing. Be thoughtful in your practicing. Turn off the phone, which is hard for me to do, especially during the baseball season. Turn off the phone. Like I have to keep checking the score like something's going to happen in half an inning that I missed out on. But that's bad habits. I have those habits, and they're not good. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen, and then we're going to work with Sequoia. I've already put up in my my copy of her recording, and let me get people back up here. I want to make sure to get Sequoia in there. I hope. Well, there she is. I see her waving at me. Hello. So let's listen to it again. Let's see if it's a little better sound. Thank you before, Joe, for doing that, but let's see if this is a better sound. stop there. Beautiful job, Sequoia. Couple of times, be careful. You're trying to use a very elegant tonguing, and then notes didn't, you heard that, didn't respond quite as much as they should. But that's a small point, easily rectified. But your beautiful sound, and what I'd like to say was quite a loyal, faithful representation of my description of the basic phrasing of it. That doesn't mean you played it exactly like I would play it, or you played it correctly, and like the one way to play it correctly, and you got it. No, you played it a way to play it correctly. But it showed in it the underpinning of phrasing, of the compositional concept, and while it sounded flexible and musical, it stayed in time. And conductors at the end, as soon as go, the conductor says, it's not the end of the piece. We have like the last 12 bars or something. You can't just like slow it down. You have to hand it back to the orchestra with the conductor, back to the orchestra. And you can't just wax poetic and go off into your own sort of melancholy haze. You must create the right feeling, as you did, of sort of last time through. Definitely not typecasting for you, but maybe an older woman sitting on a park bench and thinking of her life that has been running as this melody continued throughout the movement, and perhaps at this sort of bittersweet, melancholy moment of this coming to an end. That's a way to think of it. I mean, you could come up with your own way, but for a young lady like you, thinking about your long life in the melancholy past is not quite appropriate. But we can be empathetic to someone feeling that way, right? And thinking that way. So I'm going to open this up a little bit more. So you and I here, Sequoia, if you don't mind, unmute yourself, young lady. And you and I, hello. Well, you and I, a whole 24 hours ago, were looking at this solo. It seems like only yesterday. That's a joke. But so how did you apply? It sounds like you did, but I'll ask you, since you and I worked, I had our lesson yesterday. What were you working on in this particular excerpt? How did you work on it is what I meant to say.
Well, I recorded what you said in the lesson, and I just tried to spend some more time on it, the metronome, one measure at a time, and trying to keep time in your head even though the tempo is slow. And then doing a lot of intonation work, again, because it's supposed to be quiet. I mean, it's a solo pianissimo, but it's not loud and expressive as other things may be. Doing that, getting the right dynamics and phrasing in there, and doing the leaving out notes to get the general phrases.
I'm glad you reminded me of that. One of the things we worked on yesterday, like the beginning. Whoop. Try to keep my keys operating. So what we worked on yesterday, and we can try it now, Sequoia, if you want to play a little bit instead of me just playing, is you see that the same thing would happen is at the end of Una Fativa Lagrima. Now the way to control that is you practice. Right? And my goal at the opera when I would do that was to outdo the tenor. So by the time the tenor came in, they were just wishing in the audience, I wish the bassoon player would just keep going. Yeah. So that was my goal. And I often did it with George Manahan, who was my boss for a number of years there, and someone I went to school with. And he was great. He would just, I would ask him, how do you want it to go? And he would give me feedback if he thought I had done something too much or too little. Something. He says, yeah, you're like the singer, Frank. You just play and I'll follow you. I'll accompany you like I would with the singers on stage. And so I didn't take that as, well, in memory of Sean Connery, 007, License to Kill. But I knew that he would be with me. I was with him. And I'm listening to the harp down the row, who just showed up because she had another gig and she only had us to play towards the end of the second act. So she comes flying in at the last minute. Well, I hope the harp's in tune. I'm not. I hope the harp is. But the point is, the way I control that is by focusing on that interval. Or especially if you play the right notes. So now, the way to practice that, that's all you need to know. So, not bad for a Monday morning. So, we'll see it Wednesday morning. We'll see how many hours sleep we've gotten. But Monday morning is not, speaking of the election. So, Sequoia, grab a bassoon. You happen to have might you have a bassoon around? Look at it! Hey, wait a minute. That's my bassoon. Oh, no. Here's my bassoon. We have the same bassoon, so it's the same color. It's funny, right, to see someone with your bassoon. Put on your... Play a few notes and then unmute.
I think I'm all right.
Good. I know you're all right. So how about... Right? D flat, A, B flat. Good. Try that again. Yeah, the reed is... Maybe squish it together a little bit, maybe. Right, now play the opening as written, but thinking of that way of playing it, right? The way you just played the skeleton of notes, you might say. Nice. Remember, I know you didn't think to go on, so you keep the support going, So you'll be ready for the F, right? You have to keep your lower abdomen and your back in there. Right? That's it. So let's hear the whole thing.
Okay.
Go for it. That same thing happened there. Beautiful, by the way. It sounds great. Let's just, beautiful, really beautiful. Start the second half. And it's good what you're doing there, which is great, is you're not accenting that F. These bassoons are good for that, because you don't want... Right? Because we're going now to that note. Go ahead. I still don't hear the three Fs. I don't hear. I want to hear all three. The second one gets a little elided. Just tongue it slightly more, okay? That's all. Do it one more time. There. I'm through. I didn't mean to cheer you on and stop you. This time I promise no cheering from the balcony. Beautiful. You sound beautiful, Sequoia. You sound beautiful. Yeah. Actually, I could have stopped sharing because we were... You know what I do? So I've done in Zoom sometimes. I forget that it's you playing, and I go to stop the tape. I go to stop the recording, but you're playing live, and I'm hitting... I go, oops. Well, that's right. She's playing live right now. Anyway, that's another Zoom thing, like, you're muted. Take off your mute. I can't hear you. You know, the Zoom things that happen all the time. But that was beautiful, Sequoia.
Thank you.
Now, an interesting little thing, being that we have a few minutes, is, so in other words, you can say that the phrasing of this goes A, B, A prime, B prime, sort of. Two parallel phrases. Then, adding more to my evil ways of scheming these things out, it became clear to me that the expression doesn't work that way. The expression goes A, B, B, A, or 1, 2, 2, 1. None of those are meant to be quantifiable, just not to use the A again, and go C, D, D, C, not to use the A over again. In other words, at the beginning you're saying, woe is me. And now you tell the story part. The story continues. Now we're back to the beginning, the woe is me part. So it's something like, oh, tell me, where has my love gone? Oh, tell me, where has my love gone? We used to sing and dance and be together, all the blah, blah, blah. Oh, how I miss her, I can't live without her. Now she's gone and I will never see her face again. Right? So the whole middle section is, like I said, more telling the story, more up. The beginning and the end, to me, are more alike. Even the key change, but he makes it tricky. A flat, G flat. Tricky. Those are not our best notes. Among the other 41 not best notes on the bassoon are included, those two. So in terms of expression, I found that the phrase has a more classical arch, you know, of up and down, you know, like almost like the old, you know, hairpins, as we call them, in a certain expressive way, not purely dynamic way. But the mathematical underpinning, if you want to call it that, like in Bach, is a more parallel phrasing. So that may sound like TMI, but if you have that information in your head, you could knock off a Chike 4 when you need it. And don't kid yourself. It takes this level of preparation if you want to be successful. Don't kid yourself. So I'm a caring teacher. I'm much more patient with my students than they are with themselves. I'm very much interested in their success and come to care very much for each of them personally. But I won't kid you when I say that rather blunt statement that if you don't do this kind of preparation, don't expect the same kind of result as someone that does this kind of preparation. So we'll leave it at that and see if there are any questions. I know at Sequoia is going to be involved at 1:15, as is Emily and a number of other people in a class at 12:15, whatever I said, for Amani Wins. So we don't.
Nicely.
Yeah. So we don't need to today. I can't ramble over. I rambled enough within it, so I don't need to ramble on afterwards. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts? I guess not. I've been that good 7 weeks in a row. Or either that or time to wake up. I'm done.
Stop.
So, all right. Well, now for next week, we actually need some people to play. If we're going to have this class on applying. All right, Anna's going to play. Yay! And all right, and Haley's going to play. Haley Dyers is going to play. Thank you. The next 2 weeks. And you could do some serious orchestra prep if you want. Anyone who wants to play. And I will give you and I want you to see, I want other people to listen, because this is my philosophy of the behind the screen idea, is when you listen to your colleagues, you can be using critical thinking in terms of what you think is successful and what is not, based on your own ears or what someone like me, some experienced old bird is suggesting. Okay? But remember, if you hear something that's successful, then that's something, and that includes me, that we all should be aspiring to, that way of playing. If you hear things that bug you in someone else's playing, like articulation or vibrato or intonation, rest assured you're making the same mistakes. You may not make them exactly the same amount as they do in each category, nor do they make the same amount of mistakes as you do in each category. But be very aware of what things bug you. And when you hear someone else play, put yourself in the shoes of, do I want to play with this person? Would I want to sit next to this person for 25 years? Or behind this person for 25 years? And learn, not by criticizing your colleagues, but critically listening to your colleagues, and then making the adjustments in your own playing accordingly. That's why I'm not even that much of one to have students make comments as much, just also to keep peace in the land, not to make anyone feel badly. I look at it more like, listen to this from the standpoint of being, as I already said, repeating myself, as I always do, critically thinking, critically assessing, and then applying it to your own thinking and your own performance. You'll get enough practice at listening to auditions if you get to that side of the screen. And remember, the only difference between most of you when you play really well, and I certainly would say this for Anna and Hallie, who are more experienced, the only difference between you and the people on the other side of the screen is that they got the gig and you don't have one yet. That's the only difference. You're just as good as they are. So, but you have to be prepared to show it, right? Don't feel unworthy, but do the work. Got to do the
word
work.
there being yet. Absolutely.
Not there yet.
Absolutely.
Not there yet. Absolutely. Yeah. Not there yet. All right.
Frank, thank you. As always, it is a genuine pleasure to spend time with you on these days. You are a treasure, and we thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us on Zoom and here on YouTube as well. Want to definitely point you toward our Imani Wins seminar, which gets underway in about 10 minutes. 11 minutes, actually. I've placed the YouTube link over in the chat, and that is good to go, and we will see you all back here again.
Take care, everybody. Have a good
Thanks,
week.
everyone.
Go vote.
Yes, please.